In this portion of the lab, we're going to be looking at the brachial plexus, and we're going to be looking at some cervical nerves. We won't look in depth at all the plexus and every root and different components that they have, but I will let you know which portions that you need to know of each plexus. So here are the list of the features or things that you need to know of the brachial plexus and these cervical nerves, all right? And so if you'll notice, these numbers, correlate with the numbers on your worksheets. And so ideally what you're going to do is fill out your worksheets as you watch this video, all right? And then you can use the video to review for your exam as well. So a plexus is a network of fibers that innervate or supply structures. And for the cervical plexus, these are going to be structures of the head and neck. And so this is formed by divisions of the cervical spine going from C1 to C4. All right, so C1 to C4, and that's the region right here. All right, so here we are going to be looking at one of the branches, the phrenic nerve. You're not required to know all of the branches or rami of the cervical plexus. It would be good to learn them, but you don't have to know them all for this exam. So a branch of the cervical plexus, these are going to arise from C3 to C5. The phrenic nerve gives motor innervation or supplies the diaphragm. One way to remember this is 3, 4, 5 keeps the diaphragm alive. And so you can see the phrenic nerve right here, and it is also going to be right here denoted by the letter L or I. I'm not sure which that is on there, but it's right there. Now we're going to be looking at cranial nerves, and so some of these cranial nerves will start in the cranium and then go on out to the body. The vagus nerve is one of these, and so you will see this labeled in more than one place. So vagus, this is the 5th cranial nerve, and vagus basically means wandering. And when we go in lecture and talk about the vagus nerve, you will see why it says wandering, because it supplies a very large amount of the visceral organs. All right, so it supplies motor and somatic nerve supply in many areas. Now we're going to be looking at the brachial plexus. This is a group of nerves, or a gang of nerves. It has roots, and then the way these plexuses work, these roots will form trunks, and then these trunks will then split again and form 6 divisions in this case, and then those will merge and they form 3 cords, and then those split again into different branches. We are going to learn the 5 branches here. Okay, C5 through C8 and T1 are where these originate from the spine. That's important to know, because if you're trying to find these, and like if you come to the lab and you look at the syndagger, the easiest way to sort them out is to find where they originate from the spine, and so you can actually count down and find them. So that's very helpful. The way to remember these 5 is MARMU, M-A-R-M-U. Okay, and that is an acronym for the 5 branches. Sorry, I couldn't think of the right word. I was trying to say division. Branches that you have to learn: musculocutaneous, axillary, radial, median, and ulnar. All right, so those are the 5 that you do need to know for sure. You need to be able to identify this whole group here as the brachial plexus, and then you're going to identify in the next few slides those 5. All right, so first we have axillary, and these aren't in exactly the MARMU order, but it doesn't really matter for this purpose here. Axillary, I always think armpit. That's how I remember where this one's at, and you can see looking over here at your APR image. Sometimes I don't have really good model pictures or images, and so I will sometimes throw some APR images in here, but not always. So be sure you always look in APR and do your drills and your assignments there. All right, so axillary armpit, and you can see it over on the other model over here as well. This comes from the spinal roots C5 and C8. It is a peripheral nerve. It's part of the peripheral nervous system, and it supplies things like the rotator cuff, the deltoid, and the teres minor muscles. So I will usually hit kind of the strong points on some of these, but it may supply, there may be sometimes that they supply other things, but I just try to kind of give you a general idea of what these nerves are going to supply. So next is musculocutaneous. So musculocutaneous is kind of a hint as to what it supplies. So by its name, I can assume that it must supply some muscles, but it also must supply some cutaneous tissue, which is going to generally be your skin. So C5 to C7, this supplies the anterior arm muscles, things like the biceps brachii. Then it's going to become the lateral cutaneous nerve after it emerges the tendon, the biceps tendon and the brachioradialis. So you will begin to see as we go through the nerves in the cardiovascular system, when we start looking at vessels, that it's location, 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 all right? Because as these nerves or as the vessels move and pass certain marker points, their name changes. They become something else, or they branch off to maybe two different things and their name changes. So you always have to pay attention to that. Sometimes I will point out some very specific landmarks, so to speak, that will help you to know where they change. I do that more in cardiovascular than nervous system, but it helps to know where that demarcation is, where the name changes. Next is the radial nerve, and one thing we sometimes have to do, especially if we are working on the syndaver or even an actual cadaver, is to trace that nerve from the top portion, from that nerve rootlet to where the nerve starts, and then trace it all the way down the arm. That can be kind of difficult sometimes, but sometimes that's what we have to do in order to be able to tell for sure which nerve it is. So you can see the radial goes all the way down. So the nerve roots C5 to T1 are where this comes from, and it innervates the skin of the posterior forearm and even parts of the hand, things like the extensor muscles in the forearm and the biceps brachii. Next, we have the median nerve, and this is the one that definitely kind of lies in the middle, and you can see this over here on the left. It pretty much goes down the center of the arm. So once you kind of identify the others, if you're in a lab setting and you're looking at a cat or a syndaver or a cadaver or anything else, you can kind of go from the outside in. But median, of course, is going to be the one towards the middle or midline of the arm. So C6 to T1 innervates the flexor and pronator muscles. So I'm going to pour out my soup or pronate. This is going to split into two branches and form the anterior interosseous nerve and the palmar cutaneous nerves. So this is going to split and then have different names and have their other purposes. Next, we have the ulnar nerve, and it's so named because it passes by the ulna. Okay, passes by the ulna, and so the peripheral nerves C8. The rootlets are going to come out through C8 and T1. This is going to innervate muscles of your hand and a little bit of your forearm. And this is actually going to pierce through the two heads of the flexor carpi ulnaris. And so then it will split into three branches: muscular, palmar cutaneous, and then the corsal cutaneous branch. So this is going to split off into three branches later on. So here's a really good example of why understanding what these terms in anatomy mean, and this will go on through, you should already know intercostal from when you took Anatomy 1, learning about the muscles. Inter means between, and costal refers to the ribs, so in between the ribs. So these are the nerves in between the ribs. So these are very clearly seen there in pink over here on the left. They're not as well seen there. Here they're great, big, bright yellow and very long, extending out, making it very easy for you to see. So these are all intercostal nerves. And if you learned your muscles well and you know where those intercostal muscles are, you should have no trouble naming these, right? So somatic nerves coming from spinal nerves here, we've got T1 to T11, and these supply this thoracic wall, things like the pleura and even the peritoneum.